Is it time to respec to Arcane? Because Arcane slaps big damage in Dragonflight Alpha. That, and with the talent and all of the options that are coming to Arcane and Dragonflight, the spec is looking like it's getting a breath of fresh air, although I am still confused as fuck, but we will get into this as well. With that out of the way, welcome to another Dragonflight Alpha spec coverage, and today we're obviously taking a look at Arcane Mage, the last spec to be observed from the Mage tree. And of course, as with all of these videos, this is early alpha. Numbers, talents, builds, all of this is subject to change, as we've seen with classes like Hunter, who like probably every week has a new thing going in its talent and its build. And with that out of the way, also, if you enjoyed the content and you want to see more of this, more coming into the future, these daily videos, coverage on pretty much everything that's going on in the game, consider checking our Patreon page and supporting us, and you know, so that we can be able to do more of these videos, because it is actually possible with the support of you, dear patrons, for actually making this a reality with all the lights and the cameras and all the cool stuff that we put into our videos. It takes time and effort, and we couldn't have done it without you. So dear viewer, if you like the stuff and you want to see more of it in the future and you want to support us a little bit, check the Patreon link. You'll have a couple of tiers that you can get into depending on what you want. Maybe there's something that you like there with rewards as well, and we would super appreciate you. Haha, thank you very much. Now let's actually take a look at Arcane Mage. All right, well, I don't know if you've watched any of our other Mage videos concerning at least the general talent trees, so I'm going to be a little bit brief, but you can also check those out once you've seen this video out for other impressions, opinions on talent trees. Since Arcane is basically the last spec that I was able to test, I've kind of dabbled more and more into the general tree, and I am not happy. And also, by the way, just a little disclaimer, this is all through the lens of Flame, I suppose. It's mostly subjective opinion, although seeing as I've dabbled my fingers in pretty much all the specs in the game at pretty much any patch of the last couple of expansions, I kind of can put like things into perspective in a weird way. So maybe I'm wrong, but some things just feel weird. In the general talent tree, something that's weird is that as an Arcane Mage, you don't need either Cone of Cold or Budget Shatter, because it is budget, it's not the full effect, even if you can cheese it somehow. I don't know how you could cheese it, but if that happens, actually that's kind of cool, but I doubt it. I don't see how to actually use Shatter, Cone of Cold, and also Decurse and Spellseal are very situational choices. However, you do have to get these to path your way down to Rune of Power, which is, or you know, Incanter's Flow, what have you, depending on your choices. It's going to be very weird having to pick things that you either don't need or you don't think you'll ever want to use, or anything, right, to get actual throughput. That's a little bit weird. Not a lot of specs get this, and the specs that are actually really well designed don't make you forcibly choose utility and things like that, especially stuff like Cone of Cold or Shatter, things that are not specific to your spec, force you into those to get actual throughput. Now, another thing is also that even if you do get Rune of Power, the main cooldown, which is no longer Arcane Power, but it's Arcane Surge, and we will talk about that as well, that does not drop Rune of Power anymore. So you'll have to play the old style of Mage where you'd manually drop Rune of Power, despite the fact that Frost and Fire so far, as of recording this video, do drop their Rune of Powers by pressing their respective cooldowns. And with that, we can actually move into the Arcane Power discussion. There is no more Arcane Power, rather there's no Arcane Power the way you know it. The spell has been redesigned and now it's called Arcane Surge, and it's castable. So far, with the amount of gear that we have, it's a 2.2 second cast time, which is fairly long. However, I don't have a lot of haste, and even with that, let's say a fully geared Arcane Mage might maybe get it down to like 1.5 seconds maybe, which is still kind of a hefty cast time for a big cooldown to use, but I digress. It is what it is. The problem with it having a large cast time is that you will probably have to fit it inside one of your DPS windows, Touch of the Magi, Radiant Spark, and we'll get to those in a while. The other effect of it is that it does massive damage, but also eats up all your mana and does damage based on your mana, which is obviously influenced by your mastery and other things. And when you go into using Arcane Surge, you kind of want to be at max mana as possible. However, it depends on how and what kind of build you're using, because if you're playing, let's say, something like the Arcane Harmony, where you want to rack those 18 stacks of Arcane Missiles for that fat barrage, if you are playing that, let's say, in a raid boss, you will have to, you know, get those stacks as the pool is going, and having to get those 18 stacks of arcane missiles will chunk away a little bit out your mana. You might want to use evocation, which is another talent, or conjure mana gem, which is yet another talent, and they're fairly down the road. And if they're not part of your build, they might be a little bit out of the way, so that's a little bit weird. Some mana management might come into this, or you might just completely ignore it and just press it on cooldown. However, once you do press it for the next 12 seconds, you do have your mana regeneration increased by 450%, which is less than evocation, because I think evocation baseline has 750%. However, it does last longer, and it's passive. You don't have to channel anything. And during those 12 seconds, you also get 10% spell power so far, unless it changes. And Arcane Power is actually a passive that you use to upgrade Arcane Surge, which is further down the talent tree, and it makes Arcane Surge, the buff itself, last 3 seconds longer, so 15 seconds, and provides you 25% more spell power, meaning that it gives you 35 in total. This is essentially a non-choice. You will have to get it. It's so much buffs, so much power into one point, it's likely never not going to be picked. I would be surprised. I'm saying it's not possible, but it doesn't look like it will be. And of course, we can also move further down the talent tree and talk about the Radiant Spark playstyle, because it is what Arcane Mage is using today, and it is something that I personally believe has made Arcane Mage a much more interesting DPS spec than it has been before, and much more interesting and also difficult than most other DPS specs, which in my book is a plus. But if you do want to play the Radiant Spark playstyle, you do have to keep in mind of a couple of things. First of all, Touch of the Magi, which is also something in the middle of the tree that you will have to get, is instant. So I guess that probably is made to counteract the fact that Arcane Surge is a castable spell, but this also will very likely change your rotation or your burst window, especially if you're playing Radiant Spark, because, well, Arcane Surge eats up all your mana, right? And it does a buttload of damage, and likely if you are playing Radiant Spark and you want to go into Harmonic Echo, which you probably should unless they tweak the damage, because without it, it seems like the damage is way less. So that would be a big buff to your performance. So if you do get Harmonic Echo, the first spell in your Harmonic Echo will probably be Surge, because first of all, it does massive damage. You want to cast it with as much mana, plus it buffs the damage of all the other spells that come after. So gone are the, you know, 4 or 5 Arcane Blasts into your Radiant Spark Harmonic Echo playstyle. One of them will probably have to be Arcane Surge. Now, because Arcane Surge is next, that will also essentially give you 0 mana. So what you could do is you obviously use Presence of Mind to cast this time only 2 Arcane Blasts, because Presence of Mind, which is all the way to the left hand side of the talent tree, only buffs your next 2 Arcane Blasts, not 3. I mean, it's not a tooltip error, it does only buff 2. I don't know if this is an intentional nerf or change. I wouldn't be surprised, because even in Fire, and I believe in Frost as well, some talents and passives that have worked somehow in Shadowlands and before, and have been adapted into talents now, now they're at a reduced effect, so that wouldn't be particularly out of the ordinary, but obviously it's mechanically different, so your brain has to be a little bit rewired in this sense. And of course, the Radiant Spark playstyle is going to be a complicated playstyle that I would expect the big brain theory crafters like Dutch Magos and Toe Grinder and Cinnibun and all of these big arcane brains will probably think of a way to make it work. But for my simple brain, it's looking pretty complicated, and we will get to that in a second. However, there is something that's a little bit more fun, a little bit more simple, and that is Arcane Orb, which is on the opposite side of the talent tree, where on the right you have Arcane Harmony, on the middle you have Radiant Spark, on the left you have Arcane Orb. Now, Arcane Orb obviously was a talent before as well that you would take. It's pretty fun. It's really good to use in dungeons as well, because you instantly get a full bar of Arcane charges when you can, you know, rotate it with Arcane Barrage, which Arcane Barrage slaps like a motherfucker because of all the talent buffs and everything that you have. And you can also upgrade Arcane Orb with 2 potential upgrades. One of them is, I forgot the name, I think it's Arcane Barrage. That makes it so that once you casted 15 Arcane Missiles, you fire an Arcane Orb. Now, my personal issue with this is that it doesn't count each individual missile, but it counts the actual cast. And if it's a clear cast, it counts as 2. So it's quite a bit of Arcane Missiles by the time you get to launch your Arcane Orb, and I guess it kind of it will kind of have to take into consideration what kind of AoE build you play, because you'll probably want Arcane Orb in AoE, and in AoE I don't know how often you would want to cast naked arcane missiles outside of clear casting states, which sometimes you just want to use on Arcane Explosions, maybe, don't know yet. But Arcane Missiles is clearly a single target ability for single target encounters, and having it to use in AoE as something that feels it's only been weird with the Arcane Harmony talents, so I don't know if you will have to also pick Arcane Harmony, and if you do pick Arcane Harmony, you don't pick Radiant Spark, and what I've tested on Alpha so far has been Radiant Spark. At level 60 you cannot get all the capstones, but at level 70 you can get 2 capstones. I've managed to recreate the build that we kind of similarly have on live with Radiant Spark and Arcane Harmony, but I don't know how Arcane Orb will fit into getting into another capstone, because it's not particularly straightforward. So that particular upgrade of Arcane Orb is a little bit weird, which is why I played the other one, which gives you a second charge of Arcane Orb, which actually was very, very fun. It was very fun to play. The damage wasn't quite there, but then again, numbers can change. But the rotation was very straightforward. You have, I don't know, you use Arcane Barrage, you empty your charges, you pop touch at the Magi, you get full charges, you Arcane Barrage, you throw an orb, you Arcane Barrage again, you throw your second orb, you Arcane Barrage again, and considering how much damage Arcane Barrage does in AoE, this ends up to being a pretty fatty touch at the Magi. Now, obviously, this is just what I was able to fiddle with as I went into the talents for the first couple of hours of me playing Arcane, and this gets me into the second point, or let's say the last rather point of the talent tree, which is it's a weird distribution. The talent tree was very difficult for me to discern. Obviously, I'm not a main mage player, so I understand that, you know, my mage understanding is limited, but I can probably speak for, let's say, your average mage, right? The person that doesn't always play Arcane but is interested and goes into the talent tree, and for the love of me, I don't know if they can figure out what they're supposed to do without actually looking at a guide, which, I mean, obviously that works for us because we're doing class guides, but I think from what I've been able to hear and from what we've been hearing from the communities and the Theory Crafter communities, ideally players don't like that they have to watch a guide to play a spec. Maybe to perform at the very highest level, sure, but and also this seems to go against the design philosophy of Blizzard, where Blizzard doesn't really at least from what they've said in the past, they don't really like people having to use external sources of information to make them understand how to play the game, sims and stuff. So outside of those, it's really difficult to figure out exactly how to build your Arcane Mage, because there are single target and AoE, missiles, barrage, and Arcane Explosion nodes spread out throughout the entire talent tree, and the talent tree is very wide. And there's limited ways to get to them at first glance. It's not a particular straightforward where you could see, let's say, Enhancement Shaman. Oh, there's the Fire build on the right, and then there's the Stormstrike build on the left, and big cooldowns and playstyle defining abilities on the middle, which actually the middle is still doing that for Arcane, similar to Frost and Fire, where you have the big cooldowns in the middle. However, if you do want to build AoE, for instance, if you want to, build Arcane Explosions, you have to take Arcane Blast nodes, which are weird, because if I want to build Arcane Explosion, why am I improving my Arcane Blast? Obviously, you use Arcane Blast anyway, but ideally, it's a little bit counterintuitive, because you cannot just get your Arcane Explosion and then figure out where to build from there. You are essentially forced to get an Arcane Explosion talent, then an Arcane Blast one, then a clear casting, just to be able to get another Arcane Explosion as well, and vice versa can also apply to certain nodes. There are Arcane Barrage talents spread out through the entire tree. There are Arcane Missile talents on the left-hand side of the tree, even though Arcane Harmony and all the clear casting talents are on the right-hand side of the tree, so this is potentially weird. Sure, there's quirky ways to get to a point from different points, so you don't really have to path the exact same way, but it's not particularly obvious that pathing difference is also ideal, since it feels like you are forced to get something that you don't want or something that you have to have just to get to the ones you want. And maybe that is a good way to build your Arcane Mage, and maybe that is the way of the future. However, it doesn't feel good to be forced to play with something that you don't particularly want just to get to the ones that you want, and this mentality has permeated throughout the game for a very long time. And considering that the Shaman, and I'm using the Enhancement Shaman again, talent tree, because it's one of the best designs, does not force you to get things that you don't want to go to reach the ones that you do, clearly states that there's a possibility where the talent tree does not have to, you know, force you into ways just to be able to build your Arcane Mage the way that you want to. But I digress. This is maybe my biggest and maybe only concern with Arcane Mage is that the talent tree is very difficult to decipher, at least for your average mage and somebody that's never played Arcane before, because it's not particularly straightforward. Talents do interact with each other, even if they're spread out. They do work well. However, it's very confusing because you don't know, since Arcane Barrage can do massive funnel single target damage, but also big AoE damage, and which one do you want? Because they're both spread out on different parts of the talent tree, right? So this is essentially something that maybe they can work with, maybe they can make it a little bit more obvious, maybe swap some points around. I'm sure that the Alter Time community has a bunch of feedback you know, points and bullet points and documents already ready up for the devs, and since the devs have been particularly straightforward with answering feedback and being having, like, you know, a better way to communicate with players, I'm certain that things will be better once Dragonflight does release. And to be fair, right now Arcane is incredibly fun, even if it's a little bit complicated to build it, at least for your average dumbass. I did have a lot of fun. It was very fun. It felt like a spec that had more depth to it. Like, Jesus Christ, it has so much more depth. If you're coming from the meme BFA Arcane explosion, blast, 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 barrage, blast, 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 barrage, we know all that GIF memes with the little cat thing. Right now, it's so not that. It's so not that. But this is it. This is it for the first impressions of Arcane Mage. We're going to keep an eye open on everything that's going to be changing in the future. And obviously, we're going to have more videos for you guys ready up on the channel. If you like our stuff, you know, remember to, you know, like, subscribe, enable those notifications, because we do post a lot of stuff daily, and maybe you want to know when the next one goes on. So thank you for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Check our Patreon page once again. Thank you, dear patrons, for supporting the content and making all of this possible, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.